Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Test Automation Mantras. In today's video, I'm going to cover a few other aspects of SQL. So I'm going to cover SQL constraints. First, before we deep dive, let's understand what is constraint. So in a general term, if you try to understand, constraints are something like stops you doing something. So these are kind of rules in SQL. And why do we need these rules? These rules specify that you should not be able to insert the data which are not meant to be inserted into the table. So there are specific rules we apply not to insert unwanted data. Also limit a specific type of data. Say, for example, in a column, you would like to insert just ID and cannot be null. So you can apply a constraint that table column should accept only a not null value. Also, you would like to ensure data accuracy, and that is the time you can use constraints. So in today's session, there are different types what I'm going to cover. So the first one is say not null constraint. The second one is going to be say unique. I'm going to explain each and every term what I'm using here. Then there is a primary key constraint. We have foreign key constraint. And we can have a check constraint, say for example. So these are the different type of constraints we can use. Let's take an example of the first one. So in yesterday's session, we created few tables like employee table and department table. So in the employee table, you had a column as employee ID or employee number. You would like to apply a constraint on the employee number table that it cannot be null. So that is the time you can use not null constraints if you never want that column to have a null value. Unique, again, employee number is going to be unique across. If there are any other columns which you think cannot accept duplicate values, and it has to be unique across all different columns, so you can apply a unique constraint on those columns as well. Primary key is that particular column or a code in the table or a row in a table you would like to uniquely identify. That is the time you can go for a primary key. So primary key is a combination of unique plus not null. So primary key cannot have a null value as well as it has to be unique. So primary key is a combination of not null and unique. What is a foreign key? So yesterday I took an example of employee and department, and in the few sessions we tried to insert a record into employee table. Employee table had a column as department number, which was referenced back to department table, and we tried to insert a value, say 1003 as a department ID into employee table. That didn't work because 1003 didn't exist into department table. So the foreign key is you are specifying a relationship between two tables using a foreign key. The foreign key have one ID into a table as a primary key, and that key is a foreign key into another table. So in the example of employee and department, the department number or department ID is the primary key in department table, but that is referenced into employee table. So that employee belongs to that department will be a foreign key in the employee table. So we'll see an example of foreign key as well. Check constraint is to apply a constraint on a table. Say, for example, you would like to apply a constraint that certain column could accept only a given list of values, say A, B, C. So you can apply a check constraint. Say, for example, you have age column and you would like to limit that data cannot be inserted where age is less than 16. So you can apply a check constraint at the column level itself. So no one can insert a value which is not in the given checklist. So these are different types. Let's deep dive into now few examples. In today's session, since I've already created an employee table and the department table, let's pick some different examples. Say let's create a person table today. So first, in yesterday's session, we created table, so you must understand the DDL statements to create a table. Say, for example, you have a table as person. So to create that table, syntax is create table, table name. Then you specify a few columns to it. The first one could be, say, person ID. and you have to specify the data type for it. And second is going to be, you can say person name, or you can say first name, right? And that is going to be, say, string type. So you can specify a length as well. So 255, say, for example. And you can have a last name. And last name is again going to be a string. So you can specify varchar2. Sorry, it's a varchar here in SQL. And then you can specify, say, age as well. So again, it's going to be an int. So this is a simple table with no restrictions applied, no constraint being applied. Say, for example, you want that person ID cannot be null anytime. So what you can do is at the column level, you can specify that person ID cannot be null. And also you want that ID going to be unique. Like, say, for example, let's take first example and try to understand that. So let's execute that particular statement. And it successfully executed. Let's try to query from person table. And when you select from the person table, as you can see, the columns what we have created, it is displayed here. Now let's try to insert some data here. So when you try to insert into, say, person table, and as I said, person ID, say one, first name, it's going to be a string, anything you can put in here. So last name is, say, test. I'm going to use just dummy data here. And also the age is going to be a number, say, for example, 12. In this case, I'm just selecting a random number. So, sorry, I just forgot the values keyword here. So insert into table, and the values what you have to insert. Select that, insert it, and execute. Now the row created successfully. If you try to do a select again, you can see the records shown in the bottom. So it's person ID 1, test 2, test 1, 2. Now let's say, for example, I go and execute the same query again, and it's executed successfully. If you click, you can see person ID is duplicated here. But your requirement that person ID in this table should never be, sorry, it's not null we were checking. So if you try to insert a value here as a null, it won't allow you. But the second example is unique. So we have created two records with the same IDs. But if you apply a constraint on this table saying that person ID needs to be unique, so you can do that. Again, now since you have already created a table, so what is the option? You can delete, drop this table, create it again, saying that person ID column needs to be a unique. Then the other way is you can alter the table. So the alter the table, you have to have a syntax. Say, for example, you want person ID to be unique in person table. So what you can do is syntax is going to be the same again. It is following the DDL statements we covered yesterday. So say alter table person. Now what exactly you want to do? Add a constraint. So you can add a constraint at the table level. So add constraint, specify, say, for example, it's a unique constraint you would like to apply. So you see, so this syntax is alter table, table name, add constraint, constraint name. So you can say it is going to be on the person ID column. So you can say person ID and then specify unique keyword and then specify a column on which you want to apply that unique constraint and just execute that statement. So once you execute, okay, now since we have already inserted the data and the data is duplicate, you cannot insert a unique key. So first what we need to do is you have to delete records from the table. So there are different ways to delete the data. You can either truncate. If you do a drop, it's gonna drop the table itself. So you can truncate or delete from. So if you query this, okay, I thought we created that table. Something is happening here. So person, then execute that. And now in this case, if you insert a record and let's apply this constraint, If you try to insert this record, one row created. If you try to rerun the same statement again, you will get an error that violation of unique key constraint person ID, because there is a duplicate key value is 1, so you cannot insert that. So if you just go and execute it again, you'll be able to see the record here. Now let's commit it. I think I've turned off the commit on my configuration itself on my SQL Server Studio Management Studio level. So that could be a reason that is causing that issue. So insert it. That was the case of a unique constraint. The unique constraint can be applied at the column level. So when you're creating a table, you can add like this, person ID int not null unique, or you can create a constraint at the table level as well. That's the example what we have seen here. Now this was the case of unique and not null. Now the other one is a primary key. Say for example, you would like this person ID always going to be a primary key, so we can uniquely identify that record. So what you can do, you can specify that primary person ID is going to be a primary key. So other option is you can define similar way here, like you see in this case it's a PK, so person primary key on person ID, and then you can specify say primary key and person ID. So if you also execute that, it is done successfully. Now that was the primary key. Let's take another example of to understand the foreign key. So how we need another table where we can set up a relationship. So say for example, let's take an example of orders table. So if you have say person ordering something. So orders table, you need to create that table first. We can just say orders, whichever you want. So let's have say order ID. Then you want to have like say few other records into the table, which could be say what is going to be the order details or description. You can have with details order description, or you can have like order name as well. Along with that, since we are going to create a relationship between the orders table and the person, what relationship it can have? A person is going to order the food. Say, for example, you're ordering a pizza. So you as a person going to order a pizza from here. So you have to have a person ID as a foreign key, sorry, primary key. Sorry, you have a person table and the person going to order the pizza. So the person ID going to be a foreign key here. Foreign key, and this person ID is already a primary key into the person table. So that is the relationship going to be. Let's create a table first. So let's create table and orders. And now the column, as we discussed, we can have, say, for example, order ID, which is going to be int. And again, you don't want order ID to be null, and it's going to be unique as well. You can specify that as a primary key also in this table. Then you have order description. Again, it can be a varchar too. It can have like you can specify accepted values. Then you can have a person ID. Now person ID is going to be a foreign key here, as I have mentioned. So what you can do is it's going to be type int, and then you have to specify a keyword as foreign key. That is going to be foreign key referencing. These two are the keywords. So it is referencing references to the person's table, and in the person's table you have a primary key as a person ID. So that's how the column is going to be. So now let's try to create that. It's invalid. Sorry, it's a person table. So here, person table, and just execute that. It's created successfully. If you try to say select star from, this is again the ML statement we have already covered if you have looked at my first session. So table is created. Say for example, now you are going to insert a record into the table. So insert into orders table, and you are going to insert values. Now there are 3 values you want to insert. Say for example, order number 1, and description is say someone is ordering a pizza. Now person ID, I just say for example randomly put some number here, and you will see what's going to happen. So you're trying to insert orders into orders table, and insert statement failed because it says its statement conflicted with the foreign key constraint fk orders on person ID, and the conflict occurs on this database, and the table is person and the person ID. What it is trying to say, you have a person ID as a foreign key in the orders table. You're trying to insert person ID 12 into the orders table, but this 12 doesn't exist into the person table. So whenever there is a relationship between these 2 tables, both needs to be agreeing to whatever data in the master table is. So person is a master in this case, needs to have the ID which you are trying to insert into the orders table. So say 1 exists. If you try to execute this statement, and row will get created, and you can see that 1 is inserted. So before you can insert anything into the orders table, that person ID needs to exist into the person table. So this is a case of the foreign key. Now let's talk about the check constraint. Check constraint, as I mentioned, say for example on this age column, you would like to apply a restriction, then you can have check. For example, when you're creating a table and age is going to be say greater than 18, something like that. So you can only insert records which are specific to like greater than that specified value. So that is going to be a check constraint. Also, say for example, the other column, say for example, you would like to store a location as well. Like so, say you want to add location of the person, or say for example, address of the person, let's say location at this point of time. So varchar 2, it's going to be a string, and say 25, and then you would like to specify the location can only be into a certain areas. So in this case, say age was this one, and location will be like say Czech. It can be say London. It could be like say India, something like that. So you can apply that constraint at the column level. So this location will always accept a value from this list only. Again, once you have created a table, you would like to apply a constraint. Again, always follow this rule if you're applying a constraint at the table level. If you're applying a constraint at the column level, so this is the way to do, as we have already discussed. Now the last one is, in case there is another constraint, like say you have to define a default value for at the column level. Say it is a date column, and by default it needs to be a system date. You can do so. So same thing, you can say, for example, it's system date, or say current date. You want to have a column just to record the dates. So you can specify as a date column, and then you can specify like a default, and the default is going to be system date, something like that you can define here. If you're defining at the varchar 2 column level, so again, same thing you're going to follow. Say, for example, you want to add a city, which is going to be a varchar 2, varchar, and is of 255 characters. And then you want to have a default value specified for that. So city is going to be, say, for example, Delhi. So you can specify by default when you look at the table and you don't insert any values, it is going to be inserted as a Delhi. So you can skip that column. When you look at that, you will see the column is there. So say, for example, let's alter table person. Let's try to add this new column. Add column city, and that is going to be a varchar 2. And let's try to see if it works at this level, or we have to apply. Okay, I think we did that add. So we don't need to specify actually a column here. So this is going to be like this. So you have to say alter table name, add column name. You don't need to specify column keyword actually here. So specify column name, what you want to insert, and the data type for that. Default value is going to be what you have specified here. And if you go and select that, in this case, it's going to be T as a null. And say, for example, I go and insert the another record, I won't be able to insert 1 again. So say, for example, I say 2. I try to execute that. Let me have a look at the table again. So the person ID, first name, last name, age, and you are not specifying the city here. So it should not matter, but you need to specify, say, for example, columns here. Let me see if it is because we have specified that as a primary key. Column does not match the table definition. So say, for example, 2. We already have specified the, okay. So in this case, let's specify the column names here. Let's see if it is the issue with it. The first is person ID. Let's pick the person ID. And second is going to be, say, first name. And then we have a last name, age, say, for example, age. So these are the column we specified and we want to insert. As you can see, the values are inserted. So if you are not specifying all the columns, that is the reason you're getting that error. So you can see the code I have inserted for city. It is taking as Delhi by default value. So we specified default value as a Delhi. If you are not inserting records for all the columns, you have to specify the column names into the list when you are doing any insert. So this is like you can specify a default value. So in today's session, I have covered all the constraints, what you need to create a table, apply at the table level or at the column level. Similar to that, the last thing is if you would like to drop a constraint, so you can drop constraint as well. And it works in similar way as all other drop things work. We did discuss about dropping a column. So say, for example, you would like to drop a constraint from a table. So you can use the same thing, table. Say, for example, you would like to drop from the person's table, you would like to drop a constraint. Then you can say drop constraint name. So say, for example, constraint, and then constraint name. Say, for example, we created that unique constraint, I believe, somewhere. So say person ID, right? So you would like to drop this constraint from the person's table. So you should be able to do that. I believe that's the syntax. Alter table, person, I think it's just a person because we don't have a person. Maybe the constraint keyword, constraint. Yeah, that was the problem. So execute that. Okay, again, the constraint you see person is being referenced somewhere into the table. So you cannot drop that constraint. There are ways in Oracle, I remember you can have cascade constraints when you're dropping the constraint like this. But again, before dropping, you need to understand the dependency. If that column is referenced somewhere, have a look at the data, and you will only be able to drop it if that column is not used anywhere. But in this case, I think it is referenced into the order table. So we need to delete the records from orders table, or we need to see if we have another way. Like in Oracle, as I mentioned, it's a cascade constraints. So you can drop the similar way. Always remember, if you are applying any changes on the structure, you have to use DDL statements. If you are doing anything on the data level, you can have DML statements. If it is about the commits or rollback of the data, you have to use TC. So thank you so much for watching today's video. In case you have any questions, please add into the comments. Happy to help you. Thank you.